Hello everyone, this is Ryan from High Desert Math Tutor, and today I want to talk to you about averages and mean problems. So when you're talking about taking the average of a set of numbers or finding the mean of some numbers or test grades, you're really talking about the same thing. And the idea of an average or a mean is to find one number. So here, let me make this a little bit smaller. Find one number that will represent the middle of all the numbers you have to work with. So find one number that will represent the middle of all other given numbers. So that's what a mean or an average is. It's a number that represents the middle. But when we're looking at problems that involve averages or means, we may be asked a series of questions that are not as straightforward as just compute the mean. So as an introduction to this video and this topic, we're going to talk about the most straightforward averaging problem, which is just first computing an average. But after we talk about how to compute an average and work a problem out, we'll talk about how to update an average. So say you take 3 tests, you have a certain average grade, and you take one more test. Well, what's the new average? Or even saying you have a certain number of tests and you want your average to be higher, you want it to be, say, a certain number. Well, what would your final test have to be to get that exact average you'd hope to receive? So here, we're going to cover a few different situations, and hopefully after this video, you'll feel pretty comfortable with averaging problems. So getting started, we're going to look at just simply computing an average. So say Gabby takes 4 tests. Her grades are 98, 72, 84, and 94. So the question is, what is Gabby's average test grade? So we'll start by looking at the general formula you need for taking an average. So to find an average of, say, 4 tests, we're going to have to take the first test score, so the score for test 1. We're going to add that to the score for test 2. We're going to add that number to the score for test 3. And finally, add the score for test 4. After we add up all these test scores, we're going to divide by the number of tests we took, or that Gabby took in this case, and she took 4 tests. So notice that this number in the denominator, in the bottom of this fraction, the denominator depends on the number of pieces of data that are given to you. So the denominator depends on how many numbers are given to you. So since Gabby took 4 tests, she has a 4 in the denominator. So let's go ahead and borrow this. I'll copy it. Now we're gonna go ahead and plug in the numbers now for the situation. So we always want to start by writing down a formula that may be useful. After we write down the formula and we know what we're trying to do with the numbers that were given to us, we're going to put those numbers into the formula. So her first test score was 98. The next test score was 72. The third test score was 84. And finally, the last one was 94. So we're going to add this all up and then simplify it. So I'm going to break it into 2 pieces. I'm going to say 98 plus 72 and then 84 plus 94, just to make this a little bit easier. So right here, 8 plus 2 is 10, so put the 1 on top, 0 on the bottom. 1 plus 9 plus 7 is going to be 17. Now over here, 4 plus 4 is 8, and 8 plus 9 is, again, 17. Now I'll add these two numbers together. So 178 plus 170. 8 plus 0 is 0. 7 plus 7 is 14. 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. Whoops, notice that this is 8 plus 0 is 8. Okay, so when we add up all the scores add up to 348, but we still need to divide that by 4. Now, just a quick reminder, we can read this over here as 348 divided by 4. So the number that's being divided is always going to go inside the division bar. So we have 348, and the 4 goes on the outside. So how many times does 4 go into 3? 0 times. How many times does 4 go into 34? It goes in 8 times. 8 times 4 is 32. So we'll subtract 2 from 4. We get 2. 3 minus 3 is 0, but we don't need to put that. We'll bring down the 8. And 4 goes into 28 7 times. So 4 times 8, or 4 times 7, I'm sorry, is 28. So we subtract that. We get a remainder of 0. So the average score that Gabby gets is an 87. So once again, average is supposed to represent middle. So she took 4 tests. She got a 98, 72, 84, and 94. And we have computed the middle number that best represents all of her scores is an 87. So this is the process that you'll always follow for computing an average. But now we're going to look at not simply computing an average, but updating an average. So let's look at this new situation. So Juan's average score after 6 tests is 83. So before we even read anything else, let's just prepare ourselves to, ask ourselves, what would the average formula look like for this information? Well, the average is going to be the average of 6 tests. So we have test 1 plus test 2 plus test 3 plus test 4 plus test 5 plus test 6. After we add up those 6 test scores, we need to divide by the number of tests. And there were 6 tests, so we divide by 6. So this is the formula required for the average of 6 tests. But notice, we know what the actual average itself is equal to. So what we do with this information is, instead of writing average, we're going to replace the word average with the average that was given to us. An average given to us in the problem is 83. So now that we have this information set up, we can continue with the rest of the question. So it says, if Juan earns a score of 97 on a 7th test, what is his new average score? So the situation has now changed a little bit because instead of 6 tests, we have a 7th test. So let's come up with the formula for the 7th test. So I'll put this in a different color. Oh, I'm gonna have to make a little more space. So first of all, color, what do you want? You wanna do a little orange? Okay. So now we're dealing with the average of 7 tests. So we have ourselves set up for 6 tests, But we need to add one more test, and we need to change the denominator now. So we have to add one more test score, the 7th test, and then we need to divide by 7. So more specifically, I'm going to change these colors right here to red, or let's say purple, so we can see that these two numbers are changing. Okay, so what we have here is the formula that we know we need for 6 tests to find the average. We've set ourselves up with the information given to us by setting that formula equal to 83, because 83 is an average. And our goal now is to use this formula and the information given to us to update the average and find a new average. So with this new formula, we can go ahead and plug in the 7th test score and see what we need to actually answer the question. Oops. Technical difficulties. Okay, so if we knew the average, we would simply plug it in to where this formula says average, but we do not know. But what we do know that we can plug into this formula is the 7th test score. So the 7th test score was a 97. And since we took 7 tests, we're dividing by 7. So the only information we need to add everything together and divide by 7 is we need to know this information right here. We need to know what the first 6 test scores add up to. But notice, I didn't say we need to know each individual test score. We just need to know what they add up to. And we can find that information by looking over here. So we have some information about the first 6 tests. We know that if we add them all together and divide by 6, we get 83. So we can solve this equation for the first 6 test scores. So the question is, what do we need to do to get these test scores by themselves? Well, we know what we need to do if we look at what's currently happening to these tests. So the first 6 tests, after we add them, we're currently dividing them by 6. So we can get that division by 6 to go away if we do the opposite of dividing, which is multiplying. So if we multiply one side by 6, one side of the equation, we have to multiply the other side of the equation by 6. So if you multiply and divide by 6, those cancel out, and we're just going to get each test score, what they all add up to. So when you add the first 6 test scores, we're going to get the same thing as 83 times 6. So 6 times 3 is 18. 6 times 8 is 48, plus 1 is 49. So when you add up the first 6 test scores, you get 498. Now, we can look over at this other formula over here, and instead of writing test 1 plus test 2 plus test 3 plus test 4 plus test 5 plus test 6, we are simply going to write, I'll just write this new. We're going to write the average is 498 plus 97 divided by 7. So now we just have to do a little scratch work and we'll be all good. So first of all, 498 plus 97. So 8 plus 7 is 15. 1 plus 9 is 10. Plus 9 is 19. 4 plus 1 is 5. So this is the same as 595 divided by 7. And now 595 divided by 7. Well, this one, we're going to move this where we have a little more space. This one's going to take a little bit of work. So we have to look at how many times 7 goes into 5, which is 0 times. Now, how many times 7 goes into 59? So I know that 7 times 7 is 49. Well, then 7 times 8 is going to be 56. And if we were to go any further, 7 times 9 would be 63, and that's too big. So 7 goes into 59 8 times, and we get 56. So 9 minus 6 is 3. 5 minus 5 is 0, but we don't need to put that 0. So now let's just carry down this 5, and 7 goes into 35 5 times. So 7 times 5 is 35. We get a remainder of 0. So that tells us that the new average score is 85. So now let's back up. I know we have a bit of information in a small space, so we don't have a lot of space to spread this all out, but we can look at the original question and try to refresh what's going on. So Juan's average score after 6 tests was 83. He took a 7th test and he got a really great score. He got a 97. So what do you expect to happen to his average now? Is it going to make his average score better or worse than it originally was? Well, since his new score was higher than the original average, we expect it to raise the average score. But remember that this is only one test now out of 7 tests. So the amount of influence this one test is going to have on the entire average is not too much. So when we look at our answer that we got together, the new average is 85. So it did bring up the score. It just didn't bring it up that much because it's only one test out of 7 tests. So here, anytime you're going to update an average, we need to look at the average formula that would have been required to compute the first average. And then we need to come up with a new average formula required to solve for the average of a new number of tests. After we write these formulas down and plug in the information that was given to us in the problem, we could see that the piece of information that we needed to compute this average is actually available to us in the initial average formula. So all we have to do is solve for the information we need. Then we were able to plug it into the formula here. And we got our final answer of 85. All right, so the first question we talked about was how to compute averages in general. The second question was how to update an average. This last averaging problem we're going to talk about is what does it take to get a specific average that you want to get? So Jacob's average score after 4 tests is 89. The question is, what score would Jacob need on a 5th test to get an average score of exactly 90? So let's see. Let's set ourselves up again by writing an average formula for the first bit of information. So the first average, the formula is the average is equal to the sum of the first 4 tests, test 1 plus test 2 plus test 3 plus test 4, and then we divide that sum by 4. Now, using this formula, remember, since we were given the average, in this formula where it says average, we can plug in the number that was given to us. So the average given to us was 89. Now the new situation is we want to take one more test, and we want our score, the average score, to be exactly 90. So to set ourselves up for this one, we're going to take the first 4 tests, test 1 plus test 2 plus test 3 plus test 4. But test 5 is a special one because that's the one we're looking for. And just remember, since we're taking now 5 tests, we're not dividing by 4 anymore. We're going to divide by 5. All right, now here, remember, we have a little more information we can plug into this formula. So we have the average we want to obtain. So that average is 90. So we're going to plug 90 into this formula. And let's go ahead and look at the initial formula we needed for the first average. In this formula, we see that we have the variables for the test 1, test 2, test 3, and test 4. And what we need over here is test 1 plus test 2 plus test 3 plus test 4. So let's go ahead and solve for those values in this formula. So we get those tests by themselves by doing the opposite of whatever is currently happening to them. So they're currently being divided by 4, so the opposite of dividing by 4 is multiplying by 4. But if we multiply one side of the equation by 4, we have to multiply the other side of the equation by 4. So the multiplication and division cancel each other out, and we just get test 1 plus test 2 plus test 3 plus test 4. And let's see what we get when we do this multiplication. So 89 times 4. 4 times 9 is 36. 4 times 8 is 32, but we have to add 3. So 32, 33, 34, 35. So we get 356. That is what the first 4 tests add up to. Now we can go ahead and plug that information into this problem. So 356 plus the 5th test divided by 5 is what the average is going to be. Now, we are 100% set up to answer this question. All we have to do now is solve this for the 5th test score. So what are we doing to the 5th test score? Well, we are adding something to it, but we're also dividing by 5. So since we're dividing everything by 5, let's get rid of that division by 5 first. So the opposite of dividing is multiplying by 5. So we'll do that to both sides of the equation. Multiplication and division cancel each other out, and we get 356 plus test 5 is equal to 5 times 90. So I'm going to show you a quick little trick. 90 is equal to 9 times 10. So one fast way of multiplying numbers that end in a 0, such as 90 times any other number, is multiply 5 times 9 first. 5 times 9 is 45. And then it's basically the same as multiplying this by 10 at the very end. And anything times 10 just adds the 0 to the right side of the number. All right, so we're one step away from getting our 5th test score. So the last thing we need to do to solve for this 5th test score, let's fix our colors a little bit. The last thing we need to do is cancel out this addition of 356. So the opposite of adding positive 356 is subtracting 356. But if we subtract 356 from one side of the equation, we have to subtract 356 from the other side of the equation. So that cancels out. And what we get is our fifth test score is going to be 0 minus 6. We can't take 6 away from 0, so we have to borrow from this 5. That becomes a 4, and this becomes a 10. So 10 minus 6 is 4. Now we have 4 minus 5. We can't take 5 away from 4, so we have to borrow from this 4 and make this 14. So 14 minus 5 is 9. And, whoops, this should be a 3. 3 minus 3 is 0. So our final test, our fifth test, has to be a 94 in order for our average test grade to be 90. So I hope that if you take one thing away from this whole video, other than how to compute averages, I hope you take away how important it is to start out these word problems by writing down a formula, any formula you can think of that relates to the problem at hand. So that's all I got for you today, but if you found this video helpful and you appreciate what I'm doing here, then please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and if you have a problem you need help with, post that problem in the comments down below and I'll make a video going over a similar problem.